everybody, this is Mike Van Meter, and welcome to Recovery is Possible. And I want to thank you for joining me. And you can reach us at our Facebook site, which is also called Recovery is Possible, or my website, which is vanmeterwellnesssolutions.com. And this show exists to educate the public about addiction and remove the stigma associated with addiction, and to offer help and support to those suffering from addiction. And today, I want to introduce you to a very special guest that we have, and our guest is going to be Tom Farley. And Tom Farley is just a fantastic human being, and I had the opportunity to meet him at a fundraising event a few weeks ago that my wife and I had the pleasure of attending, and he was a keynote speaker. And I was really, really touched by his story and the story of his family. And, on this podcast, I talk quite a bit about addiction and how addiction affects the family, runs in families, and, the whole process of recovery involves all of us in a family. In fact, you can go on and say that addiction affects a spectrum even larger than the family, because, this is going to affect your friends. It's going to affect your your workplace, your boss, coworkers. Everyone is involved in your orbit if you have an addiction. And Tom just has a phenomenal story. And some of you may know him best by being the brother of Chris Farley, who unfortunately passed away from his own addiction. And Tom's going to talk about that, and Tom will talk about his own story as well. And it's just very powerful, and I'm very touched by the work that he does today to try to help those that are suffering. And, just a great human being. He's very gracious with his time joining us today, and I'm very excited about that. So with that, Tom, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be here, and thanks for the intro. And you're right. It all starts with family, and that's certainly where we're no different. But from those origins to where I am now, it's been a journey. But I couldn't be happier than where I am right now, a person in recovery. So love to, as part of that, just tell my story, which is. So I thank you for that opportunity. That's great.
Yeah, and you know what? I think if we could maybe just start at the beginning and talk about what it was like, growing up, and maybe your introduction into alcohol and any other substances that you had, and where that ended up, because, for many of us, it starts at a very young age.
Yeah, well, I mean, we had coming out, we had a big family. There were 4 boys and an older sister. And my parents, and, we had all the boxes checked. I mean, we had, we had a family history. My mom's, she's from Boston. She's, big Boston Irish. A lot of history there, and my father's from Wisconsin, and combined, there's a lot of history between the two of them, and so we had that. As I mentioned before, we were Irish, so we had that box checked, and then finally we were from Wisconsin. We grew up in Wisconsin, which is one of the toughest environments certainly for alcohol around. So coming out of that was all that factored in, and wasn't really. It just was, it was always around. Every gathering every night. It was just part of the scene was drinking, and like, you really can point to anyone that, like, oh, that person's got a really drinking problem. It was just always prevalent. There were, nobody was really overboard. But I say that it's funny because years later, people ask me, like, certainly when it was me or one of my brothers, they go, well, when did you first notice? I'm like, well, you didn't, because we lived in Wisconsin. I mean, it's so normative that no one stuck out, but everyone was, just at a high level of, consumption. So, we kind of grew up doing that, and back in the day, we all kind of, I think most of my brothers and I, hit the age 18, before we're that old. So we were all 18 before drinking was, elevated to 21. So, if back, when we were in high school, if drinking, the legal drinking age was 18, that means, okay, well, then you were, 15, 16 when you really started. So, that's kind of what we did. And we kind of went through our, college years, and then, when we had to be responsible, it kind of hit us. So, it's interesting. I'll jump around a little bit because that's what I do. But, I remember looking back at some of our, it's hard when there's like, so my sister Barb never really had any sort of issue with drinking. She'd get up to like 2 glasses of, 2 beers or 2 wines or whatever it is and stop, which is weird. I'm just kidding.
It's alcohol abuse.
Yeah, exactly. What the hell? What's wrong with you, Barb? And then, my other 2 brothers and me, we were, just these heavy binge drinkers. We just didn't have a off button. Once we started, we just, we didn't drink every day of the week or when we woke up, but when we did, when it was go time, it was go time. And so that was the 3 of us. And then you had my brother Chris, who just went from one thing to the next to the next. It was always just an increasing kind of thing. And so we all kind of had this same environment, baseline, experience, but we reacted to it differently. And that's one of the messages I tell people is like, you don't know what you're dealing with, and you could have as I said, all of us reacted differently. So, and as long as we could point to somebody that was worse, like with Chris around, we could always say, well, we're not that bad, so we must be okay, right? And I remember going to my first couple times when I tried to get sober, going to AA meetings. My barometer was always drinking, and I could always point to somebody that drank more or took drugs and drank, like, well, I'm not that bad, so I guess I'm okay. So I guess I don't need, the program. And so that was same thing with my family. We all thought we were okay because we weren't that bad. So that's kind of the training we had. We were trying to, all this focus was on, on Chris, but we weren't really dealing with our own issues, or maybe, there was also the thought that we weren't really being helpful to Chris as much as we could be, because we had this fear that, we'd have to address our own issues, which, maybe we should have, but the fact of the matter is that it's irrelevant. If, your problems are your problems, and, if Chris really needed help, then we should have been there, but we didn't get all that stuff. And so literally 25 years ago, Chris dies, and I kind of had to figure out what I wanted to do with that. And the best thing I could think of doing was going into schools and kind of telling Chris's story, and hopefully preventing kids going down the same road, because there was so much, he had so much, I was able to, through Chris's name, get his attention. So I did the Chris Farley Foundation and started doing all this great work, and trying to raise my own family at the same time. And I knew I had these 3 kids, and I was going into schools talking about prevention. And I kind of thought, like, well, I don't want my kids growing up in the same environment I did. So during that time frame, at least for like 15, 16 years, I would be able to put together like 5 years of sobriety. And like I said, I probably shouldn't drink, especially if I'm kind of doing this, foundation where I'm in schools talking about. So I would stop drinking for like 5 years. And that's as far as I would get. It was always around year 4 or 5 where I, would my brain would kind of start getting louder and louder. And I would say stuff like, well, it's St. Patrick's Day. I've been, I can have one Guinness, right? I've been 5 years, sober. What's the difference? I got control of this. I know how to, I can manage it. And I would have that Guinness. And then I was amazed at just how quickly I just came back. I was back where I started, heavy drinker again. And I would do that for about, 10 years. And then, I would say, I got to stop drinking again, because it's really funny was, I couldn't understand the fact that I was sober, but I was still creating all these kind of train wrecks and havoc and broken relationships. I'm like, I don't get it. But I'm doing the right thing, right? I'm not drinking. So I put these, 2 stints of sobriety together in between, it was just this up and down thing. And I kind of did this. So then about 4 years ago, I got to that same point again. It's like I got tired of this, and I was getting old, so I was doing just these, all this stuff. I was putting too much thought into my drinking. Like what back roads am I going to drive home from this party with? So I can avoid whatever. Just this crazy. And I was smart enough to know, like, this is crazy thinking. Like, this is you're leaving parties early, so because you can still drive home, but then you get home and continue the party on your own by yourself. That just was crazy to me, especially with all the family history I've had, and all that kind of stuff. So I said, all right, I stop. And I was like, I stopped. I got 4 months of sobriety in me, and I met somebody who I had done some work with in some of her, outpatient. She had ran a teen outpatient clinic here in Wisconsin. And she called me up one day, just kind of reconnected, and she said, "How you doing?" And I kind of proudly tell her that I hadn't had a drink in 4 months. I am. I'm back on track again. I haven't had a drink in 4 months. She's like, "Okay, that sounds wonderful. Well, let's have coffee." And I said, "I'd love to." And she said, "Well, why don't you meet me at Saturday morning at 9:00 at the basement of the Presbyterian Church?" I'm like, "Okay, here we go again. You want me to go and meet it? All right, fine." But this
You're like, the coffee must be good there.
Yeah, like, really? Why are we going to the basement? Oh, I know where we're going. So, but this is somebody that I had tried, I had worked with. I trusted. I saw all the work that she had helped so many people in her capacity with her clinic, and I'm like, this is somebody that accepted me and trusted me, and then I trusted her back, and I said yes. I said I gave up. I said, okay, I'm giving it up. I didn't know that I was, giving something up to a higher power or whatever it was, but it just was that right person at the right time. So I said, okay. And I started going to meetings, and I realized quickly that it wasn't about being sober. I started listening. The first thing I did was just kind of shut up and listen. I started looking at people and not looking at how much they drank or the stories they told. I was looking at people and hearing their stories, and I was like, oh my gosh, I think like that, or that's the way that's my decision making. That's how I behaved. It wasn't about my drinking at all. It was about how I processed the way I thought about things. And that was when I realized that all these years that being sober just is giving me the clarity to deal with the stuff I really need to deal with, the stuff I really need to deal with. And it was just, I just approached recovery completely different with that mindset. It was just a different mindset. And what helped me was the first time I literally heard, I finally listened to and read, the big book, and when I heard the words rigorous honesty, it just was like this. That's, what I was looking for all this time, man. Because I mean, I was a marketing professional and I was an Irishman. So I know how to craft a story. I know how to craft make the world, just show the world a person that I thought they wanted to see. And I would, kind of, that I spent the whole lifetime of kind of living a life that wasn't really me. And I think I really knew that deep down inside. And that's probably what was driving a lot of my drinking, because it just didn't feel right, didn't feel authentic. And so I heard rigorous honesty. I'm like, God, is that the thing that's going to just take this burden off my shoulders? And sure enough, it was. I just started being truthful with myself, and really just telling myself to be truthful with myself. And not being truthful to other people. That wasn't what I was trying. I was just wanted to be truthful with yourself. Start there. And I started doing that. And, yeah, little by little, it just opened up a whole, I don't know what just opened up a whole new kind of view of life. I started just kind of dealing with, what I was, just what, just my stuff, and not worrying about, what other people thought of me or where I should be in life and things like that, and or needing to control everyone else in my life so that I can have this, I can produce this person that I thought that I should be. Like, instead of being that person myself, I needed other people to do certain things so I can be the person I thought I should be. It was a whole control thing. It was crazy, but it's funny to look back now. And so I just started to be myself. And what was really cool is I had spent 20 years going into schools and communities and places, doing great work, but I was always talking about somebody else's addiction, somebody else's struggles. And of course, to talk about the times when Chris was in recovery, and just doing amazing stuff with his career. But again, it was somebody else. And once I started, I'm still talking to groups and advocating, but now I'm talking about myself and the reaction I'm getting to me just being my authentic self, more than I ever had talking about my brother. And that it amazed me. I'm like, you don't want to hear about like this brother of mine? And they're like, yeah, if you want to mention him, that's fine. It's kind of interesting, but your story is helping. And I'm like, wow, okay. Let's do more of that then. That's great. Because here I am, I always wanted to help people, but now I'm telling my story and being more authentic, and I realize I help myself, so I don't know. That's a long story, but that's kind of the crazy journey.
No, it's a powerful story. And
yeah,
when you had periods, it sounded like maybe 4 or 5 year cycle, then there would be a relapse, and then another 4 or 5 years. But I'm taking it that you're in continuous sobriety now. You have been?
100%. Yep. Yeah.
And
I love it.
About how long would you? What's the period between now and the last time that you had your relapse?
Well, I've been in recovery for in 2 weeks. It'll be 4 years. So
that's phenomenal. Yeah.
And so then before that, I was drinking for probably 8, 10, probably 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had my, then I was just being sober. But I would have 5 years of sobriety and then followed by 10 years of drinking. So this last 4 years has just been, but it's been like totally in recovery, and it's been, yeah.
And you know what? I think that, the literature tells us that relapses can be a learning tool for us. And I know that that was true in my own case, and it sounds like it's in your case. Sometimes we have to prove to ourselves that, when we talk about how this is a progressive disease, it gets worse over a period of time. It doesn't get better, and that you can't go back and safely drink again. And the danger is that you might get away with it for a little bit. And that's what I heard in your story is, hey, look, I can have a Guinness and I can go, look at that. See, it didn't, these guys keep telling me that it's going to be worse than it ever was. And it wasn't. I had that one Guinness and I moved on. And then you have another one, but then all of a sudden it hits you like a freight train. And I think sometimes we need to prove that to ourselves. But the lesson with that is that if there was any doubt, you understand now.
Yeah,
right.
No,
and I know that was my case.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting is in looking back at that time period, and that specifically not that thought process is having that Guinness. That wasn't the relapse.
Mm-hmm.
The relapse was the thought that I could have one that preceded the actual picking up the Guinness and drinking it. That was the relapse, when my mind went back to its old thinking and said, you can have that drink.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what in this last 4 years, I have been, that's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm not trying to avoid the next drink, but for some people that they need to do that. I'm not trying to avoid the next drink. I'm trying to avoid my mind from telling me that next drink is okay, that you can manage that. That's again, it's not about the drinking for me. It's about the thinking that goes into it, or the not being truthful, the inauthenticness, living that, that, and not feeling good about it. And and wanting to and needing to, drown that out, medicate, just kind of medicate away that horrible feeling that I was not being, my true self. Yeah. So
it starts out weeks, maybe even months ahead of time, and a lot of people say that. I've mentioned on this podcast before that. That it's not like you're driving down the street one day and your car just automatically turns right and goes into a store and buys alcohol and then you're drunk. It doesn't work that way. It's something that, and you can almost sit in meetings and watch people in meetings and just listen to what they say and you talk to them before meetings and after meetings. And just by the way that people are talking, you can see the relapse. You can feel the relapse coming.
Yeah,
because the language changes, the thought processes change. And when people start lying to you, or they're being deceptive, or they're not being totally honest, that's an indication too, because, it starts with not being honest with other people. And ultimately it ends with you not being honest with yourself. And then it's not going to be long after before that relapse occurs. That's why brutal honesty is paramount to the whole program.
And it's the right honesty. Somebody asked me once on a different podcast, like, well, what's the difference between recovery and long-term recovery? And like, I don't know. I'm going to be in recovery. All I know is I'm in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to, but I can tell you some stages that was interesting to me is like, and the thing the kind of the easiest kind of measurement for me, is when I went through a divorce, and when that first happened, I was drinking, and when somebody said, "Well, why did you get divorced?" and when I was drinking, still not in recovery, my answer was, "Well, my wife didn't respect me and really didn't support me, didn't have my back." Boom, that's it. And then I got into recovery. I started out in recovery. And if somebody asked me like a year in, and people did, and I remember, hearing this change. And so said, "Why did you, tell me about your divorce?" And I said, "Well, to be perfectly honest, if I'm going to be rigorously honest with myself, I didn't respect or support her either. she didn't support me. I didn't support her. That's why we got divorced. I'm just being honest with myself. I'm being honest with myself. And then further down in recovery, now when somebody asks me that question, my only answer is I wasn't very respectful, and I didn't have my wife's back, and it was me. Her part of it is irrelevant, because I can only deal and control what I could, and I have to take responsibility for that. I can no longer control or judge other people. They're part of a relationship with me. I can only take responsibility for that part. And that's how I describe kind of where I've come in recovery. It's like that's where I am now. It's like it doesn't matter kind of these other things, like why did you get fired? Well, my boss was it's just all about your action, just your stuff. And that too has made a huge difference. It's taken away so much, everything like anger, fear, all these negative emotions. It's helped to kind of rid myself of that. And I lived there. I lived there in those kind of emotions.
Well, it's interesting about that, because you raise a good point. I'm going to circle back to something you said a little bit earlier here in a second, but I want to make a larger point, because it's a critical point, I believe, and I'll get your thoughts on this. And that is that it sounds like in your story there was a lot of time spent on not only your ex-wife in what she was doing and how did her actions contribute to the divorce, right? So you're negating. You're not now, but I mean at the time, negating what your actions in the breakdown were, because there's two people involved in this, and no one's perfect, right? And then earlier on, it seemed like in your story that you were kind of missing your own substance abuse issue, because you said that your brother's substance abuse issue was so much greater, at least in your mind, it was so much greater than yours. Hey, look at him. See, we're all looking at him. We're putting effort into him, but meanwhile, nobody's looking at themselves. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely.
And so what it did was everything is external, but the problem is that in recovery, it may be Chris that is out of control. It may be that my ex-wife is out of control. It may be that my boss is a jerk and I didn't deserve to get fired. That might be. I don't know. No one knows.
Sure.
But I know this. I can't control Chris. I can't control my ex-wife. I can't control my boss. But I can control myself. Or I can try to. Let's put it this way. I'll try to control myself. But that's the only person that we have control over. Yeah.
When that realization hit me, it was just wow. I was able to give up so much baggage and shit that I was carrying around, and just say, look, it's all you, dude, and so what's really cool is, so I started doing that. I just tried to be the best person I could be, and really and I was just working on that. And then I realized I was no longer a threat to people. I was no longer, people didn't walk with eggshells around me, because they knew I was just kind of focused on me. And the result was it brought people, it attracted people instead of repelled, pushed them away. I started bringing people back in, especially like some relationships that I had fractured, like particularly talking about my ex-wife, who now I'm back, just one of the people I'm still extremely close to, because I'm no longer a threat to her. She doesn't have to walk, she didn't, I'm okay. We have a long history. We have 3 kids. So like, why wouldn't I want this person in my life? But I was pushing, everyone away. So it's, and my kids now everything's much better, because I'm not a threat to them. And they see me kind of working really hard on doing making amends, apologizing, doing stuff that I, that a human does, and I'm getting that feedback from them, and there's nothing like getting this, acknowledgement from people in your life that you've had a hard relationship with, and they all of a sudden come back and acknowledge, something positive that you're doing, and the whole time you're not, all I was doing was trying to work on myself. I wasn't trying to, fix this relationship or make them understand kind of what I was just focused on myself, and they saw it and they came back, they reacted and they acknowledged it. And I'm like, and all of a sudden, like, you're like, oh, you're noticing that. That's wonderful. I wasn't doing it for you to notice it. I was doing it just to be a better person.
Well, that's the funny thing in recovery is there's a phrase, and that is time takes time. And, one of the things we talk about the 8th step and the 9th step, making that list of amends and then making direct amends. There's a reason why it's step 8 and 9, and it's not step 1 or 2. Because I've seen this in recovery, and I'm sure you've seen this. People come in, and almost from day one, it's like, oh, I get it. I'm powerless over this. I need to find my higher power. Or they even forgo that part of it, and they just go straight to I want to tell how sorry everyone I am, because they interpret steps 8 and 9 as just telling everybody that they're sorry, and then they jump to 12. I just want to run and tell everybody what a great thing this is, and you need that. It's like there's 3 steps. It's like the buffet. Just take those 3 steps, and you forget that there's a whole bunch of other steps. And by the way, the amends part is 8 and 9. It's much later in the program, and the reason being is A, you're not ready for it, and B, they're probably not ready for it. They need to see the change, that living amend. They need to see it. That, in our addiction, we've lied so much, we've disappointed so much, we've caused so much damage. And how many times have we told people we were going to stop and we didn't? They don't want to hear it anymore. They want to see it. They want to see it, and that's what you're demonstrating.
It's not amends. It's not necessarily or shouldn't be a vocal thing. It's it's an action thing.
That's right.
And sometimes the amends, like as I said, like when I get this acknowledgement from my kids or something like that, like, oh wow, you're doing so, it's like that they open up that I remember acting like this and doing these kind of things, and that they bring out the amends sometimes. A lot of times. It's not me kind of saying, hey, I'm sorry I did this. They're acknowledging something positive I'm doing, and it gives me an opportunity to say thank you, and I'm also sorry for the things that the stuff I did that I didn't do in the past. There's the opposite.
But
of what I'm
they
doing
initiate it. They acknowledge that they are ready for that conversation.
Yes, exactly. That's the best kind of amends is when they pull it out of you. Is like they're showing that they're ready. You're forcing that on them when they're not ready to hear it. It's what use? It doesn't. It's not being a benefit to you or them.
You know what? I'll tell you. In my own case, let me just share with you a quick little story. I like a lot of addicts, we're extreme personalities, right? And I'm no exception to that. And I had when I got into recovery, I got into prior to needing to be in recovery, I always kind of fancied myself as sort of a health nut. I was in the military, so that was just part of what we did, right? But then, drinking, took that away from me. So when I got sober, I decided, I'm going to get into health and fitness. Well, the way that we're wired, if you go run a 5K, well, why not run a half marathon? Well, okay, why not run a marathon? Hey, why not run a marathon, then run back to the starting line? So I got into, ultra marathons, which is a really, really bad idea if you're thinking about doing that. And,
no, not at all. No, as a matter of fact, I had the opposite reaction. I was never going to do it.
You're thinking, I might be extreme, but that never crossed my mind. But anyway, so I ended up doing that, right? I ended up doing this 50-mile race, and I am probably, maybe 2 years. Yeah, I think it was 2 years in recovery. And you get this medal, right, for this. And it was sitting out on the counter of my kitchen, and I remember my son walking in. And he came in and he said, "Hey, I am so proud of you. I know this was really difficult, but I'm very proud of you." Now, I have in my mind, because the medal for this particular race that I completed was on the counter. That's what I'm thinking. And what I didn't realize was he was congratulating me on having 2 years of sobriety. And he says to me, he says, "Hey, I'm so proud of you." And I'm like, yeah, well, thanks. That was a really dumb idea. And he's looking at me and he goes, "What?" He said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, that was really stupid. I don't recommend that." And he's looking at me, he's going, "What are you talking about?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And he said, "Your 2 years of recovery. I know what a struggle that was. I know how tough it was. And I think that's fantastic. And Dad, you're a tough guy, but that was the toughest thing that you've ever done in your life." And I said, "Oh," and I pointed over at the medal and I said, "I thought you were talking about that race." And he goes, "Oh no, that was really stupid. You should never do that again." But that was when the discussion, but that was sort of the door to then have a larger discussion about, hey, let me talk to you about, the things that I did while I was drinking that, I'm ashamed of and I'm sorry for. But he was ready. But that was the moment where I knew he was ready for that. But that was 2 years later.
Wow. Yeah. Sometimes it takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
Depending on the, So, those are great moments, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And let me ask you this. And you said that when you went to your first AA meeting, when was your first AA meeting? Like, where in the progression of all this did that happen?
I would say probably the second time. I did the first 5 years of kind of white knuckling it without kind of doing. I just kind of said I'm not going to drink anymore and see how far that got me. And then I went back to drinking. And then the second time, then I moved back to Wisconsin and said, I got to stop. I got to do this again. And I got to do this again, and I'll try AA. And I just kind of looked around the rooms and, I'm like, I'm not connecting with these people, because I was kind of, I was looking at them completely differently,
Mm-hmm.
So it was probably, it was probably, 15 years ago.
So, and for those that are listening, and if you've never heard the term white knuckling it before, what that means is not drinking, but not working a program. And I'll tell you, Tom, and I appreciate you sharing that, because you hear that all the time, and I work in the addiction field now, and I hear it from people that relapse all the time. They say that they're white knuckling it. I don't like meetings. I don't like those people. I don't like any of that. So I'm just going to do it on my own. Rarely, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I don't really know anybody that does recovery on their own. And you can always tell people that are white knuckling it, because they're usually not real happy people if you do happen to meet them in a meeting.
Because you're not. We all know that this is, mental illness and substance abuse are diseases of isolation.
Yeah.
The flip. Well, everyone knows that, and that's that's, I think of the times, whether I was drinking or not, I was definitely in isolation. But the flip side of that phrase is that we cannot heal in isolation either. It demands connection. It demands as a fellowship, as we call it. And I couldn't do it without that. It's that connection. And I guess I was fortunate enough to, like a year and a half into my recovery, that COVID hit, and all of a sudden the rest of the world kind of started to feel and experience what isolation really feels like, what I've felt like most of my life. And people around, a lot of people in our sometimes in our communities, in our own families, have felt like that their entire lives. The difference is the rest of the world all of a sudden felt isolated, and they were like, they couldn't handle it. They were starting fights in Walmarts and getting thrown out of planes, and it was that bad. And I'm like, that's how bad being disconnected is. But I was, during COVID, I could log on to a meeting any place, anytime, any place in the world, and feel immediately connected. In this extremely isolating time period we had. But I because of my recovery community, I could connect at least on one level. It was just around one kind of common thing that we shared, but it was a connection. And the beauty is about recovery for me is like that's teaching you how important connection is, it's teaching me once again, if I ever felt it at all, what it feels like to be trusted and accepted, to be amongst people where I feel, less fear because I have trust and acceptance. And, that's the ideal. As a matter of fact, that's why we're on this earth is, we are hardwired for connection. That's our whole being. And so, it took me to be in recovery to find that and identify what it feels like to be connected. And now, now the goal is not to just stay in recovery. My recovery communities, now I want to go out into the world, if you will. If I don't feel that same connection, that same trust, that same acceptance that I have in my recovery community, I got two things. I can either leave. I got to tell myself this isn't a good connection environment for you. Get the hell out of there. Or I've got to accept that's the case. Like it could be a business function, whatever, and just tell myself, this isn't what this is. That this is not a connection kind of environment, and accept that. I think my whole nature is I've always wanted, because I was so isolated, I wanted to connect with everybody, and that's not a safe thing to do. It's not a realistic thing to do.
Yeah, it's funny because I was thinking the same thing about the pandemic. It's like the whole world got a taste of what being in active addiction was like, and nobody liked it. Nobody liked it at all, and it's tough. And the unfortunate part was, in the early part of the pandemic, meetings were shut down. We weren't connecting. Churches were shut down. Interestingly enough, liquor stores were kept open, and in some parts of the country, medical marijuana it was available, but yet you couldn't go to a meeting. It was just a very bizarre period, and I'm glad that we're not in that time frame anymore. But it really is about connection, and but going back and looking at people, and I think what's interesting about this, and I've seen this happen with a lot of families and a lot of groups. So you come from a family where there alcoholism was there. Later, drugs came into play, and so addiction is addiction, and there's a definite genetic predisposition towards addiction. So you had it in the family, and what was interesting is you said early on in this program that you, and it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is what I heard, was that you and your family members looked at Chris, and it was, hey, look, he's so out of control, but nobody was looking at themselves. And so if you don't mind me, do you mind if I talk about Chris a little bit or ask you some questions about that?
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely.
And how it relates back to our own recovery. So Chris was in his active addiction, and it was a public, really kind of an issue at that point. And a lot of people were trying to helping him, and you saw this, but yet you continue to use. And at the time, how was his use affecting you, or did you notice it? And then with his story, how does what happened to him and not getting well, even though it was offered to him, because I know he went to a treatment a number of times, how do you take sort of the lessons learned, pull those lessons away from that whole story, if you follow me? And I know that's kind of a loaded question, but sort of what example did that set, and how do you look at it now compared to back then?
Well, a couple of things. As far as the family is concerned, there's one image that I'm particularly haunted by that I remember it distinctly. It was a Christmas Eve, and in our family, that was a big night. We we would stay up late to open all our presents when we were older, and drink and laugh and all that kind of stuff. And this particular Christmas, I think Chris was just out of treatment, and we were doing the same thing. We were, having the brandies and having a great old time. And I remember just this vision of Chris just sitting there with his mug of coffee, just trying to be sober, while the rest of his family was doing the same thing we always did, because it wasn't our problem. Chris went to treatment, blah, 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 and he's kind of saying, but, we're not that bad. And so we can still do what we're doing. And we weren't, I just wish we would have been there for Chris at those moments, but we just didn't understand. We didn't know. And we just didn't think it had anything to do with us, or his, his recovery and sobriety, we didn't think it was connected to us at all. We should have been, that we should have been that connected enough to be there for him. So I remember always thinking about that, and I always thinking about, how it affects, positively or negatively, somebody that's, has this disease, it affects a lot of people. And so I always remember that based on that vision. But, we all kind of reacted, I remember that's the first time I stopped drinking, when was Chris, I was in New York, he was in New York. I was kind of like everyone else was back in Wisconsin. So, I did get to see also up front, just amazed me was Chris in recovery when he was successful, and I saw his career just explode, and how he was just so amazing, and that impressed me. That's where I was the older brother. He was just always this knucklehead, and all of a sudden he's like really, he wasn't just kind of doing the same old stuff that Chris always did, which he was naturally funny at. He was actually really, really understood his craft and really just became a real artist. And I was, that impressed me, that raised me. And then he asked me to come to his like 3rd year anniversary, AA meeting that he was chairing. And that was the first meeting I ever went to, that I watched Chris just up front talking about his addiction. I'm like, I don't know this guy. I mean, this is a new Chris. This is great. This is amazing. So, those things just kind of, just stayed with me. And so I said, all right, I'm not going to drink. Then Chris died, and we, again, just a lot of stuff happened, but, I didn't really, we all, I did. It's funny, like the first person in my family to get sober was my mom, who was, just doing it because she was, trying to keep up with the rest of us. She's this little tiny little thing. And, she stopped drinking, and instead of going to AA, she went to Al-Anon. She was trying to figure out, like, she had a husband that drank too much. She had kids that drank too much. So that's her response, was to kind of go that route. But she's been sober over 30 years,
Oh, that's phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the first one, it's incredible. I got to tell you too, and she's still alive, and, just me being in recovery, just being able to give her that gift, from personally, it's just like, I just see it in her face all the time. And we talk about it all the time. We talk about, she's almost like my sponsor, because, I see her every day. And so it just gives her so much joy that, somebody in the family gotta figure it out. So,
well, that's phenomenal. And so obviously we know how this story ended, and he'd been exposed to, it sounds like he had a 3rd year anniversary, and you went to that meeting. So he had periods of sobriety. What was happening? What happened?
Well, he lost that connection. He always had, he had people that he trusted, whether it was, some like a couple of really close good friends, or just his ensemble at work. Saturday Night Live is this tight ensemble. He felt trusted and accepted there. And then when he went to LA and Hollywood, he lost that. He was isolated again. And at that time, also his career, like he was no longer a person. He was a commodity, and he felt that he understood. He that affected him a lot. I mean, it really. He didn't know who to trust. He saw all these people making money off of him, and that's every pro athlete, every musician, every actor, they all go through that same thing. All of a sudden, there's a lot of people making money off of your talent, and that's a heavy thing. And so he just that became kind of very isolating for him. He had that, he lost a little trust, and I think he gained a little fear in that process, and that was enough to, and not only that, but his work, especially at when he was in Chicago at Second City and SNL, those were every day. He had to show up to work. It was just high, he was getting this constant affirmation of applause and laughter, and that he needed and thrived. And all of a sudden, he goes to Hollywood and he's making a movie, and then he's got 6 months off, and that stuff stops. That every day and that affirmation, it just stops, and he didn't fill it with anything. And that's where all of a sudden it went from just one extreme, just up and down roller coaster. He just kind of lost that grounding, element of his recovery community. So
it all goes back to community. It just does.
100%, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a tough business to be in when you have an addiction issue. And
Truly.
I my younger brother works in the music industry, and drugs and alcohol are everywhere. It's just everywhere. I mean, it's I don't know if there's a tougher place to be than in that world, and it's available. And then to be surrounded by people like you mentioned that aren't necessarily your friends and don't necessarily have your best interest at heart. They are in a relationship with you because of who you are, what you represent, and they make money because you're making money. And the day that stops, then their relationship with you stops. And I can't imagine what that would be like. Yeah, I just can't imagine what that would be like. It's a tough place.
Can't. It really is. It's sad. I just feel bad for. Now you see it a lot, and it's like, oh, here's another one. It's tough to watch. It's because I lived through it. I saw it.
Did you see it coming? I mean, like the day that you found out that he died, was it a surprise to you? Or, because sometimes you hear people say, I saw this coming a mile away, and they're not surprised by it.
No, I mean, you never think it's possible. But I mean, literally, I saw it on CNN. That's how I learned, seeing it on the news, and that in and of itself is a shocker. That's just, that's not how you're supposed to hear these things.
Yeah, that's amazing. And at the fundraiser that I met you at, you relayed that story. You were in a friend's office. You were actually in an office, and the TV was on in the background, and you literally looked over at the TV and saw your brother's picture on the TV. Correct?
Yeah. So the first thought was like, now what's he doing? What's he doing now? I thought they're announcing it, and I turned up the volume just as they're, showing his apartment and the ambulance out front, and hearing these words that it was surreal. Yeah, it was very strange. And I think, as I said in the event, my first thought, for the next, couple months was like, nobody how do I share this with them? Like, this is so, nobody goes through this. Nobody has this experience. And, the more and more I've gotten into this field, I realized that, I share this loss and grief with way too many people. It's very, I'm in a very large group of people that share that. So, but it's also why I'm all of these experiences we've been talking about are why I'm in treatment, in the treatment field myself now. I mean, I now work for a treatment, mental health and substance abuse organization in Illinois called Rosecrans, and it's all because of these experiences. And even during COVID, when I was doing a lot of podcasts and webinars talking about this coming storm. We're going to have this, what's coming after the pandemic. We had an epidemic before the pandemic, and now people are going to be leaving the pandemic with behaviors they didn't have going in. And there's going to be a real need for people in treatment. And I realized for 20 years I've just been talking about it. Now I just kind of felt I needed to actually help people get into treatment, and that's where I am now. And I just never felt like I'm so finally in my right lane doing what I should be doing.
Yeah.
So
you and I both took that path, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. It becomes your life. And then, because your life is going so well and your life has been repaired, you want to devote your life to helping others see and experience what you've experienced.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, I mean, and you know this too, and I say this to so many people. It's like we talk about treatment and we talk about the addiction, all that kind of stuff, but we don't talk enough about is there's nothing like seeing, a human being made whole again, mm-hmm. and given that gift of life back on the other side when they come out of treatment, going to and start working on a program, being in aftercare and recovery, to see that this person that wrote themselves off, that's just that their communities have been, families sometimes had written off as like there's nothing of value here anymore, and to see them on the other side. That's the real gift of the working in this field is to see that what's possible on the other side. It's truly it's truly amazing.
Yeah, it sure is. Well, tell us a bit about, you mentioned what where you work and what you do. What is it that you do? When you say you help people get into treatment, so what do you do?
Well, as an outreach, community relations person, my job is to really find the hardest thing for anyone seeking help is just there's so many barriers to recovery, and finding the right place to where to go. Jesus, I hate, just the whole, the first question everyone's always asked is what insurance do you have? I mean, it's just that is no way for anyone to be welcomed into, treatment. And it's just a bad thing. So it's just, my job is to if it's not into our our treatment programs, I know other places in Wisconsin where they can go. I either want to get them to our door, and then pass it off. Let our admissions be then you take it from here. I'm getting people to our door. I'm telling about our services and all that kind of stuff. But if they can't, if for some reason we don't have the right programs, or they don't have the right insurance for crying out loud, I kind of feel like all right, that was the first step. Let's find someplace else. Let's make sure that we find your place. That's kind of my job, is to really make sure that people get access to the treatment services that are going to work the best for them.
Well, that's great. Now, if any of the listeners want to, do you have a website or do you have any way that social media that you'd like to put out so they can contact you?
I'm on, usually, I don't know what my, Twitter, I think it's Mad Farley, MADFARLEY and I think, so that's Twitter. And that stands for Madison because I live in Madison, Wisconsin. It doesn't mean I'm like angry,
Yeah.
but sometimes it does work that way.
Yeah.
And then I think Tom Farley too is my Instagram. But I kind of so I haven't figured out kind of like my social media persona versus my like this is what I do for a living persona. It's just kind of something for myself. I feel like this is all I do, which is wonderful. I mean, I like it, but
it becomes your life. Yeah, it really does.
It totally does. Oh my gosh.
Well, I tell you what, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. It's fantastic. And I know the listeners have gotten a lot out of your story, and there's a lot of really good, solid recovery messages in your story. And I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. I hit it, and the other stuff, it's like, there's so many other things, that I'm still dealing with now. It's the whole thing of like, I always talk about, my brother and my recovery. And then there is a time when you have somebody that's, I have the loss of a family member. I've got that I can, that I'm still kind of, working through and I can talk about. Then there's also, like there's those times growing up when and people that have somebody in their circles and families that has an addiction that they take all the focus, all the attention. And that, if you're part of it, like you can resent and you can, you don't understand. And like that's a real thing. And I had to, accept and acknowledge that and to deal with it too,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
With Chris.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was at a part of a group. It was not a recovery group. It was another program that I'm involved in. And the first time I heard an analogy like that, and it really hit me, and it was the first time I'd really thought of this in this way, was there was this young man, and he was talking about how his brother, who was a veteran, came back, struggled with PTSD, saw a lot of combat, had a lot of issues, and ultimately this young man committed suicide. Well, the man that I'm speaking to is his brother, and it's a couple years later after the suicide, and his mother, single mom, that became sort of her persona.
Yeah,
it became her persona, and that's all she talked about, and it's all that it consumed her. And of course, I'm thinking, well, of course that would consume any parent would, but that's the first time I heard this young man say, but you know what? I really resent her for that. And he went on to explain it's because it's almost as if she forgot that there were other people in her life.
Yeah.
So every day that she was mourning that, she was not, not spending time in developing the relationships that she had. And I never thought, Tom, of it that way. But that's interesting.
Neither did I. Neither did I. But I was carrying around those resentments. I'm like, why did I respond that way? I look back now and it's because I was carrying that around, and so that's what I'm saying. Like it's taken all these years to deal with that. And I don't, those are my feelings. I don't again, because I'm in recovery, I get to focus on dealing with that feeling. I don't lash out at my family for always focusing on Chris. I don't, lash out at Chris because he was the center of attention, all this attention that he was kind of always doing. I just these are your feelings. You got to deal with that.
Yeah.
That's
tough. Well, I tell you what, I think there's so many different things we can talk about. We got to have you back on this program. Would you be willing to come back
sounds
on?
Like it. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, definitely. Because there's so many things that we can talk about. And but it's been a real pleasure having you on the program. And thanks for giving us your time. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. Again, it was a great conversation. It's good stuff. And it's important stuff. So I'm happy to and it helps me too.
Yeah,
I'll
it
send you a
does.
nickel.
That's
Thanks
what. And if you're listening to this program, helping others helps us as much, if not more, than it does the other person. It's what we do.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's so true. So
Well,
thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
And so, folks, as I always like to say, I don't represent any group. Now, I know we talk about groups. We're talking about AA, and maybe we'll sometimes we talk about family programs, but we don't represent them. And I don't represent anyone other than myself, and the same is true with Tom. And our only purpose in giving this information is to share with you what we've learned, because it's helped us, and maybe it'll help you too. So if I've said anything that doesn't apply to you, or if Tom said anything and you don't agree with it, then just discard it. But try to take any information that you can use for yourself and help others as well, because that's what we do in recovery. We help ourselves along the way, and we help to impart the knowledge that we've gained to others with as well. And so with that, folks, please visit my Facebook page, which is Recovery is Possible, and my website, which is VanMeterWellnessSolutions.com, and let me know how I'm doing, and let me know if there's a topic that you'd like to hear about, because we're here to help you guys. And take care of yourselves, and we will see you next time.